When the Chilean army captured a chupacabra. Most people think armies fight wars and keep countries safe. But armies also help with other jobs like floods or earthquakes. Sometimes armies deal with very strange problems. Like hard-to-control animals that seem to defy explanation and challenge everything we think we know about the natural world. In 1932, the Australian Army fought 20,000 big birds called emus in what became known as the Great Emu War. The birds ate farmers' crops across Western Australia, destroying thousands of acres of wheat fields. Despite being armed with machine guns and military vehicles, the soldiers found the emu surprisingly difficult to defeat. The birds scattered when attacked, regrouped quickly, and seemed almost immune to the military tactics used against them. The birds won that fight, proving that nature can be more unpredictable than any human enemy. Animals can be very dangerous, especially when they display behaviors that seem impossible to predict or understand. This is particularly true for animals that hide from people, move in ways that seem supernatural, and act in ways no one can predict or explain using normal scientific knowledge. In 2000, something weird happened in Calama, Chile, that would test the limits of what people believed was possible. People there became very scared of some kind of mean predator that seemed unlike anything they had ever encountered before. This creature would challenge their understanding of the natural world and force even the military to take unprecedented action. First, this thing killed farm animals in ways that defied explanation. Then it attacked people directly, causing mass panic throughout the region. Things got so bad that the Chilean army was called to help deal with what many considered to be a supernatural threat. But soldiers had no idea what they were looking for or how to fight something that seemed to exist beyond the realm of normal military operations. Hundreds saw this creature over the course of several months, but their stories were never exactly the same. Even though everyone described it differently, soldiers and civilians alike knew one thing for sure: it had an insatiable appetite for blood that set it apart from any known predator. This is the strange story of when the Chilean army caught a chupacabra, a creature that would become one of the most famous cryptids in modern history and spark debates about the existence of unknown species that continue to this day. It's hard to know where chupacabra stories first started in South America, but most researchers trace the earliest documented encounters back to the mid-1970s. Some think the creature first showed up in 1975 with weird animal deaths that couldn't be explained by conventional predator behavior. One morning in February that year, people in the Puerto Rican town of Moca woke up to discover a horrific scene. They found their farm animals dead in circumstances that made no sense according to everything they knew about how predators hunt and kill their prey. 15 cows, 3 goats, 2 geese, and 1 pig were all found dead in what appeared to be a coordinated attack. The farmers had put these animals safely in their pens the night before, following the same routine they had practiced for years without any problems. What confused people was that animals were still locked in their pens where farmers put them the night before. The gates remained securely fastened, and there were no signs of forced entry or struggle that would indicate a normal predator attack. Stranger still, none had been torn open and eaten like normal predator attacks would suggest. Bodies were completely whole with no missing limbs or chunks of flesh torn away. The only thing missing was all their blood, which had somehow been completely drained from their bodies. Dead animals had somehow been drained of every drop of blood, leaving behind desiccated corpses that looked almost mummified. When farmers looked closer, they saw each dead animal had similar wounds on necks or chests, dried blood around 3 round holes arranged in a perfect triangular pattern. These holes were precise and clean, unlike the jagged tears that would be left by the teeth or claws of known predators. This was clearly not a normal predator attack, and the local farmers knew it immediately. Over the next months, attacks kept happening with increasing frequency and similar mysterious circumstances. By March, around 90 animals had been killed in Moca alone, all showing the same strange blood draining and triangular puncture wounds. Local people were almost in panic, and word spread beyond the small town as news of the bizarre killings traveled throughout Puerto Rico. A local newspaper ran a dramatic story called "The Vampire of Moca Strikes Again," which helped spread awareness of the strange events but also contributed to growing fear and speculation. Most people outside the immediate area thought the story was silly superstition. They figured rural farm folks were just letting fears run wild and seeing monsters where none existed. How could they be sure it wasn't just wild dogs, an elaborate hoax, or simply the result of overactive imaginations fueled by local folklore and superstitions? Eventually attacks stopped as suddenly as they had begun, and people gradually stopped talking about the mysterious creature. Life went back to normal routines, and the whole incident became just a local legend that older residents would occasionally mention. Kids born later might hear about it as a scary story parents made up to keep them from wandering alone at night. That is, until the mid-1990s, about 20 years later, when the creature started attacking again with a vengeance that would make the 1975 incident seem minor by comparison. In 1995, Puerto Rico again experienced strange animal killings that bore all the hallmarks of the earlier Mocha incidents. This time, whatever was doing the killing seemed much more aggressive, bold, and deadly than 20 years before. The creature appeared to have evolved its hunting techniques and was no longer content with small-scale attacks. In just one night during August 1995, 150 farm animals and pets were killed in the town of Canovanas, which was less than 100 miles from Mocha. This massive killing spree represented an escalation that terrified local residents and suggested that either the creature had become more powerful or multiple creatures were now operating in the area. Like the earlier killings from 1975, all animals were completely drained of blood and showed the same 3 holes in a triangular shape on their necks or chests. The precision and consistency of these wounds suggested intelligence and purpose rather than random animal violence. But unlike the 1975 killings which had occurred in rural areas where news traveled slowly, now deaths were happening near the capital city of San Juan where media attention was immediate and intense. So attacks quickly became big news that couldn't be ignored or dismissed as rural superstition. Every major news outlet ran the story with graphic photos of blood-drained animals that shocked readers throughout Latin America. Headlines spread throughout South and Central America, and the story was picked up by US and European news outlets that brought international attention to the phenomenon. People came up with different theories about what could be responsible for such organized and systematic killings. Some suggested deaths were part of satanic rituals performed by devil-worshipping cults that had developed sophisticated blood-draining techniques for their ceremonies. But as attacks continued night after night with military-like precision and efficiency, witness reports poured in from people claiming direct encounters. Unlike previous attacks from the 1970s which had few eyewitness accounts, lots of people were now coming forward claiming to have seen the creature responsible for the killings. The problem was, if what they were saying was true and their descriptions were accurate, then Puerto Rico was dealing with something completely unknown to science, a predator that had never been documented or heard of on the island before, or anywhere else for that matter. A famous Puerto Rican comedian named Silverio Perez came up with a nickname during a television broadcast that would stick forever and spread throughout Latin America. He called it the CHUPACABRA, which literally means goat sucker in Spanish, referring to the creature's apparent preference for attacking goats and other livestock. Because of all the different details people gave in hundreds of chupacabra sightings during 1995 and subsequent years, it's extremely difficult to describe the creature exactly. Eyewitness accounts varied significantly in specific details, but some key features appeared consistently across multiple independent sightings from different locations and time periods. The chupacabra is most commonly described as a creature that walks upright on 2 powerful legs, standing approximately 4 to 5 feet tall when fully erect. Its legs are frequently compared to those of a kangaroo, muscular, bent at sharp angles, and clearly designed for powerful jumping and rapid movement across varied terrain. The creature is usually described as having no hair or only thin patches of coarse fur covering what appears to be leathery brown skin or scales like those found on large lizards. The skin texture is consistently described as rough and reptilian, suggesting the creature might be more closely related to reptiles than mammals. Often witnesses report seeing a prominent row of sharp spikes running down the creature's back from its neck to its tail area, sometimes accompanied by a long, lizard-like tail that it uses for balance during rapid movement. These spikes appear to be bony protrusions rather than fur or feathers, adding to the creature's reptilian appearance. One of the most striking and consistently reported features is the creature's eyes, which have a distinctly alien appearance that sets them apart from any known animal. They are described as large, oval-shaped, and disproportionately big compared to the creature's head size. Witnesses consistently say these eyes glow with an intense red or bright yellow light in darkness, creating an hypnotic and terrifying effect. The chupacabra's kangaroo-like legs are incredibly powerful, allowing it to make enormous leaps that seem to defy physics. People have reported seeing the creature jump distances of 20 feet or more in a single bound, covering ground at impossible speeds. It can also move incredibly fast while crawling on all fours, switching between bipedal and quadrupedal locomotion depending on the terrain and situation. Even more shocking to witnesses is the creature's apparent ability to attack prey from above using what appear to be bat-like wings. These wings allow for limited flight or at least extended gliding, giving the chupacabra a three-dimensional hunting advantage that makes it nearly impossible to escape once targeted. The creature also possesses large, needle-sharp fangs that appear designed specifically for piercing blood vessels. All animals killed by chupacabras were found completely drained of blood but without other significant marks or wounds. This suggests that the chupacabra either produces some kind of anticoagulant like vampire bats, or has developed a feeding technique that allows for efficient blood extraction without causing additional trauma. By the end of 1995, people throughout Latin America believed the chupacabra was responsible for more than 1,000 reported animal deaths across multiple countries. The creature had evolved from a local Puerto Rican mystery into an international phenomenon that would soon challenge military forces. By the end of the 1990s, the chupacabra had become something like Bigfoot is in North America, a famous mystery creature that captured public imagination throughout Latin America and spawned countless investigations, documentaries, and debates about its existence. It's hard to say definitively whether this widespread expansion was because all the international news coverage got transformed into various folk stories that spread through cultural transmission, or simply because people in neighboring countries stopped ignoring their own long-standing sightings and strange killings and were now connecting these incidents with the popular name, chupacabra, that had emerged from Puerto Rico. Whatever the case, by the end of the decade, reports of chupacabra attacks had been showing up from the southern tip of South America through Central America all the way to the southern United States. Each region seemed to have its own variation of the creature, with local characteristics that reflected regional wildlife and cultural beliefs. While some of these reports were probably just people's wild imaginations running amok or attention-seeking individuals looking to capitalize on the chupacabra craze and media attention, there are many more people living across Latin America who would say with complete conviction that the chupacabra was and still is a very real and very dangerous threat to their communities. The creature had become a unifying legend that transcended national boundaries and cultural differences, creating a shared mythology that connected diverse Latin American communities through a common fear and fascination with the unknown. Case in point, what happened in Chile in the year 2000 when the military got involved in what would become one of the most well-documented and controversial chupacabra incidents in history. Chile is a long, narrow country that stretches down along the western coast of South America like a ribbon of land between the Pacific Ocean and the Andes Mountains. Unlike many other Latin American countries that had experienced relatively stable democratic governments, Chile was still getting used to its newfound freedom in the 1990s after decades of brutal military dictatorship. For nearly 20 years, from 1973 to 1990, Chile had been ruled by a brutal military dictator named Augusto Pinochet whose regime was characterized by systematic human rights violations, political repression, and state-sponsored terrorism. Thousands of Chilean citizens were killed, tortured, or disappeared during his rule, with many more being forced to flee the country or live in constant fear. The Chilean people finally succeeded in getting rid of the dictator in 1990 through a combination of international pressure and domestic resistance movements, making way for a democratic government again after nearly 2 decades of authoritarian rule. However, after living nearly 2 decades under Pinochet's iron fist, the psychological trauma of fear and violence weren't easy to forget or overcome. The year 2000 was seen as a year of hope and renewal, with many Chileans looking forward to a new millennium that would be defined by national healing, political freedom, democratic participation, and economic prosperity. The country was working hard to rebuild its democratic institutions and heal the wounds left by years of political violence. But while their political fears were gradually diminishing as democratic institutions strengthened, a new and completely unexpected kind of terror was about to emerge that would test their newly restored faith in rational government and scientific understanding. In the first few months of the new year, that terror would take the form of the chupacabra, a creature that would challenge everything Chileans thought they knew about the natural world and force their government to take actions that seemed to belong more in a science fiction movie than in real life. According to those who lived through the events and documented them at the time, the trouble first began on the night of April 12, 2000. Oddly enough, the initial incident had nothing to do with dead farm animals or mysterious predator attacks, but rather with something that appeared to come from the sky above. What happened on April 12 took place just outside the small town of Tucapel in Chile's central region, an area known for its agricultural communities and relatively peaceful rural lifestyle. Local residents reported seeing a cluster of strange lights moving silently across the night sky over the nearby countryside in a formation that suggested intelligence rather than natural phenomena. The witnesses said the cluster of lights quietly descended from the clouds like an airplane preparing to land, moving with purpose and coordination. However, unlike an airplane, these lights made no sound whatsoever and seemed to glow with an internal luminescence that was unlike anything produced by conventional aircraft lighting systems. The lights then disappeared from sight beyond a line of trees that bordered the town, apparently touching down in a remote area of dense forest that was rarely visited by local residents. The entire sighting lasted approximately 10 minutes and was witnessed by dozens of people who had never seen anything like it before. Curious about what they had witnessed and concerned that something might have crashed in the forest, the townspeople organized a search party and went out the next morning to investigate. They followed the approximate trajectory of the lights and searched through several acres of dense vegetation looking for any sign of what had come down the night before. All they found was a large circular patch of dried thorny plants that had clearly been flattened by some kind of force from above. The flattened area was approximately 30 feet in diameter and showed a distinctive spiral pattern, as if something had touched down while rotating. Most strangely, this flattened area was surrounded on all sides by completely untouched vegetation that showed no signs of heat damage, chemical burning, or any other conventional explanation. It looked exactly like something large and heavy had landed directly on top of the thorny plants with tremendous force and then departed vertically without affecting the surrounding vegetation. It clearly wasn't an airplane crash, which would have left debris and a path of destruction. Given the complete silence reported during the sighting and the precision of the landing site, it hardly seemed possible that it was a helicopter either. Disturbed by the strange event and unable to come up with any rational explanation, people both in town and on the small farms scattered around the edges of Tucapel were left wondering what exactly they had witnessed. The incident created an atmosphere of unease and anticipation that something extraordinary was happening in their quiet rural community. But then a few weeks later, things got even stranger, and now genuinely terrifying in ways that would forever change how the residents of Tucapel viewed their peaceful countryside. It was around 8:00 p.m. on Saturday, April 29, just over 2 weeks after the strange lights incident. Jose Ismael Pino looked tired. Being 59 years old, it was partly his age catching up to him, but it had also been a very long and physically demanding day working on the Esperanza Ranch near Tucapel. He was finishing up the last of his duties before his shift ended, going through the familiar routine of checking that all the animals were secure and all the equipment was properly stored. By this point in the night, Jose was completely alone on the ranch. Most if not all of his fellow workers had already departed for their homes, leaving him to perform the final security checks around the barn and surrounding facilities. Accompanied by 2 of the ranch's guard dogs, large, well-trained German shepherds that were known for their loyalty and protective instincts, Jose felt satisfied that everything was properly locked up and secured for the night. He moved toward the main barn entrance to leave, looking forward to getting home to his family and a hot meal. But just as he reached the open doors that faced out toward the main pasture, he saw something in the distance that immediately annoyed him. The other workers had specifically told him that all the farm animals had been brought in and secured for the night according to standard protocol, but now looking out over the darkened pasture, Jose could clearly see that one of the bulls was still outside. The animal appeared to be running around freely in the open field, apparently having a good time and completely ignoring the fact that it was supposed to be safely secured in the barn with the other livestock. This was not only a violation of ranch protocol but also potentially dangerous, as unsecured animals could wander off the property or be attacked by predators during the night. Jose sighed heavily, realizing that his workday was far from over. So much for getting off work on time and enjoying his evening with his family. He would now have to walk all the way across the large pasture to retrieve the wayward bull, a task that could take another hour or more depending on how cooperative the animal decided to be. Starting to walk toward what he assumed was the escaped bull, Jose cursed under his breath and called out to the animal in the firm, authoritative voice he had developed over decades of working with livestock. He hoped the bull would recognize his voice and come over on its own, potentially saving him the trouble of walking all the way across the entire pasture in the darkness. The animals on the Esperanza Ranch all knew Jose well and usually responded immediately when he called to them. His voice was familiar and associated with feeding time and care, so most animals would approach him willingly when summoned. The dark shape in the pasture stopped its movement and turned its head to look directly at him, which initially seemed like a good sign. That's when the hairs on the back of Jose's neck stood up and a chill ran down his spine. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness and he got a better look at the creature, he realized with growing horror that what he was looking at wasn't a bull at all. In fact, now that his vision had adapted to the low light conditions, Jose couldn't really make out what it was he was seeing. The creature was unlike anything he had ever encountered in his nearly 6 decades of life, most of which had been spent working with animals in rural settings where he thought he had seen every type of wildlife native to the region. In a later interview with local journalists, Jose provided a detailed description of his encounter with what he would later conclude must have been a chupacabra. "I saw what I thought was a large bull running wild in the pasture. I was walking along when I saw this dark shape moving and I thought that was it. Hey, damn bull!" I shouted, using the same tone I always used with the livestock. But then I saw that it wasn't a bull at all. It hardly moved when I called, it just stood there looking directly at me with these glowing eyes. It stood about 1.5 meters tall, like a big monkey but completely wrong in its proportions, with long clawed arms that seemed too long for its body, enormous fangs sticking out from its mouth that caught what little moonlight there was, as well as a pair of wings folded against its back like a bat. I was so scared I couldn't move at first, then I turned and ran as fast as I could. I ran back for the dogs, set them loose and let them chase after this thing, hoping they could drive it away from the ranch. The 2 German shepherds, trained guard dogs with strong protective instincts, immediately responded to Jose's distress and charged after the creature with aggressive barking and snarling. However, instead of standing its ground or retreating slowly like most wild animals would when confronted by large dogs, the chupacabra displayed remarkable speed and agility, easily outrunning the dogs and disappearing into the darkness beyond the ranch boundaries.